I think in Florida now, anyone can hunt a python, and you get a prize too. Like you get money.
At sunrise in the Florida Everglades, something strange began to move in the grass. They looked like harmless rabbits, soft, twitching, and perfectly still. But what hid beneath their fur wasn't alive. Officials had quietly released hundreds of them, each powered by the sun and built for one chilling purpose: to lure out the Everglades' most unstoppable predator. Locals called it madness. Scientists called it genius. But when the first cameras started rolling, what they captured changed everything. The question is, did Florida just outsmart nature, or unleash something it can't control? Everglades under siege. At sunrise, the Florida Everglades glows like a living mirror. Sawgrass shimmering over slow water, herons standing still as statues. Yet beneath that beauty lies one of the most devastated ecosystems in America. For decades, this vast wilderness has been under silent attack. The invader isn't a pollution spill or a human development project. It's alive, coiled, and unstoppable. The Burmese python, a predator born in Southeast Asia, has turned Florida's wetlands into its own empire. No one knows for sure how many are out there. It's estimated there may be up to 100,000 slithering Burmese pythons, some nearly 20 feet long, in Florida's Everglades. The invasion didn't begin as an accident of nature, but as a human mistake. In the 1980s and 1990s, the exotic pet trade flourished, and baby pythons were sold as harmless curiosities, glossy, patterned, and docile enough to rest in a child's hands. But those pets grew. Within a few short years, many reached 15 to 20 feet, strong enough to crush a deer or an alligator. Owners unprepared for the responsibility began releasing them into canals, swamps, and backyards. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida, destroying reptile facilities and freeing countless snakes into the wild. Those escapes seeded the population that would later engulf the Everglades. Python's new world was paradise. The Everglades offered warmth, endless cover, and prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. With no natural predators and the ability to lay up to 100 eggs a year, the population exploded. Biologists now estimate that tens of thousands roam South Florida. What they've done to the food web is catastrophic. The areas where pythons are dominant have led to the almost complete extinction of raccoons, opossums, and rabbits. Even deer and bobcats have been affected. A single python was found to have a deer inside its stomach. In another incident, a python was filmed fighting an alligator. Both of them died in the end. The loss of species is just one part of the whole chain effect that runs through the ecosystem. The disappearance of small mammals would mean a lessened food supply for the birds of prey. The decrease in scavengers would result in a longer time for the decaying bodies to alter the soil nutrients. The Everglades' fragile ecosystem has started to break down under the python's pressure. Scientists used to report the presence of marsh rabbits in almost every part of the wetlands, but nowadays there are whole areas without any. The conflict over the Everglades has turned into a fight in which humans are gradually losing. The hunters are walking in water, reaching up to their chests, and are being led by drones and flashlights. However, with every python they get, many more unseen ones hatch. The new arrivals are disappearing into the reeds before the human foot even gets close. Millions of dollars have been spent by the authorities on various methods like removal programs, bounties, and research, but the situation remains the same. Pythons have made a perfect adaptation to their environment. On the other hand, humans are the ones who are running out of options. Meanwhile, the scientists also pointed out that the snakes could move north along with the rising temperatures, thus invading other areas across the south. The Everglades might be the first place to get affected, but taking over the rest of the area may not be far away. Little did Florida's wildlife officers know, the next strategy they tried would ignite one of the strangest hunts in modern history. Bounties, hype, and hard math. When officials realized just how unstoppable the python invasion had become, They did what humans often do when faced with a wild problem. They turned it into a competition, cash prizes, public glory, and the thrill of the hunt. In 2013, Florida launched the first ever Python Challenge, an open call to anyone brave enough to step into the swamp. The concept was bold, maybe even desperate. Arm citizens with basic training, set them loose for a month, and pay for every snake brought back. On paper, it sounded like a victory waiting to happen. In reality, it became a study in frustration and human endurance. The first challenge drew more than 1,600 participants from across the country. Hunters came with airboats, machetes, and flashlights strapped to their foreheads. TV crews followed, turning the Everglades into a surreal blend of reality show and survival contest. For days, the swamp echoed with the sound of motors and shouts as people scanned the reeds for the telltale shimmer of scales. The media loved it, but the numbers told a harsher story. After weeks of effort, the combined haul totaled just 68 snakes. 68 out of tens of thousands are believed to roam those wetlands. It was a fraction so small, biologists barely noticed the difference. Florida had no choice but to continue. The Python Challenge turned into a yearly event, with even larger prizes, more training, and better promotion. The hunters picked up their mistakes and used thermal scopes and night vision equipment. Out of all the hunters, some managed to get their hands on dozens of snakes in one season. The winners were greeted as champions. One of them caught a python that was more than 17 feet long. Nevertheless, the scientists' conclusions were always the same: the harsh reality. The mathematicians figured out the numbers and came up with the conclusion that the snake's population would always be an upward curve. Then, officials realized that the seasonal competitions were mostly just a way to get publicity and moved on to a more professional strategy. In 2017, the South Florida Water Management District initiated the Python Elimination Program. This was not a game anymore. It was serious. Paid hunters received training, were licensed, and were charged an hourly wage rate with bonuses for every python they caught. The length of the snake directly correlated to the amount of money one could make. The hunters went on night patrols of the canals, looking for snakes by scanning the area for movements under the moonlight. Their boats were sliding through the black water. It was exhausting, perilous, and sometimes solitary work, but it was effective for a period of time. The number of pythons slayed increased year after year. However, the number of pythons in the area did not decrease at all. It was like every time you removed one snake, two more came out of nowhere. The financial aspects were harsh. It took millions of dollars to pay the contractors for chasing snakes over an area of 1.5 million acres, and in turn, the returns kept decreasing. New tech, like the Judas snakes, which were fitted with radio trackers to lead hunters to breeding grounds, was only a little help. The Everglades was just too large, too intricate, and too full of hiding spots for the reptiles. By the end of the 2010s, the officials had to accept a bitter fact. Overcoming the python threat with just human resources was not possible. No matter how hard-working the humans were, they could never compete with a creature that was designed to be unnoticed. It was just like pruning a big fire with scissors, the whole thing. Each hunt, every capture, and all the bounties that were paid was nothing but that. So the question changed. If hunters couldn't outfight the snakes, could something else outsmart them? The answer began with a wagging tail and a powerful nose. Dogs that sniff the unseen. When the bounty programs failed to make a dent, wildlife managers realized they needed a new kind of hunter, one that didn't rely on sight, luck, or endurance, but on pure instincts. That's when Florida turned to an ally as old as humanity itself, the dog. In 2020, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched a small but daring experiment. 2 dogs, trained like detectives, would be sent into the swamps to do what humans could not.
The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recently began training 2 dogs to detect a python scent and alert handlers when they've come across a snake.
Smell the invisible. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, had the easygoing face of a family pet, but the focus of a soldier. Eleanor, a Dutch shepherd with alert amber eyes, was bred for precision and courage. For months, they were trained to recognize the faint, musky odor that Burmese pythons leave behind, a scent humans can't detect but lingers in grass and mud long after the snake has passed. Trainers hid pythons in crates, in tall weeds, even under waterlogged logs, until the dogs could find them every time. Once in the field, they worked on long leads, handlers following close behind with GPS trackers as the dogs sniffed, paused, and pulled toward unseen targets. The results came fast. In their first month, the duo helped capture several large snakes that had eluded human crews for weeks. Truman's tail would stiffen, Eleanor would circle, nose low, and suddenly freeze, the universal sign that prey was near. Moments later, a handler's flashlight beam would catch the slow ripple of scales. It was astonishing to watch. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes, where biologists had searched for hours. Word spread quickly across the agencies. For the first time, it felt like humans had a fighting chance. But victories in the Everglades always come at a price. The swamp is a tough place to live. Extremely hot, very humid, and very dangerous in every aspect. The paws can be cut by the sharp sawgrass. The water can be home to alligators and cottonmouths that are deadly on the first bite. Handlers had to do a lot for their dogs. They had to dress them in vests designed for cooling, put boots on their paws, and give them water all the time. And then the predator, the python, was there to make everything even worse. In spite of the difficulties, the dog teams managed to reveal a really impressive thing, a pattern. The scent trail led to nests, egg clusters, or other snakes hiding nearby every time they tracked a python. This discovery implied something broader, a map of the invasion. Scientists started to chart these discoveries, identifying the areas of reproduction that they had previously been unaware of. The dogs were not only capturing snakes, they were also revealing the problem's structure. Nonetheless, it remains that no matter how efficient the two dogs were, they would still not be able to cover the whole 1.5 million acre swamp area. To broaden the existing program would entail setting up hundreds of teams, spending millions of dollars, and providing constant maintenance. The technique was very effective, but on a small scale, a tool, not a solution. Truman and Eleanor had proved one thing very clearly. The use of creative methods was successful, but the Everglades required more than just strength or instinct. Their victory opened up a new but unavoidable question. If the smell was able to lure the snakes out, what if the bait could attract them even more? Could the very thing they were after, which was the snakes, become the one to provide the researchers with victory? That question would lead scientists down an unsettling path, one that blurred the line between biology, ethics, and desperation. From live bait to blueprint. Desperation breeds innovation, and sometimes controversy. After years of failed hunts and limited success with detector dogs, Florida's scientists and wildlife managers found themselves staring at a difficult truth. To defeat the pythons, they needed to understand what the snakes wanted most. The answer was simple and unsettling. They wanted rabbits, specifically marsh rabbits, once among the most common mammals in the Everglades, and now nearly wiped out. A question that followed was as risky as it was bold. Could live rabbits lure pythons out of hiding? At first, the idea sparked outrage. Yet for some biologists, it was an unavoidable next step. Pythons are ambush predators, drawn by scent and heat rather than movement alone. In small, controlled studies, researchers built secure pens along swampy trails and placed live rabbits inside. The pens were designed to protect the animals from direct attack while still letting their scent and heat spread through the environment. What happened next stunned the teams. Within weeks, pythons began appearing, one after another. In a single study site, more than 20 snakes slithered toward the enclosures over the course of a few months. The rabbits, terrified but unharmed behind wire barriers, had become magnets for one of the most elusive predators on Earth. The findings were undeniable. The presence of rabbits could concentrate python activity, making them easier to locate and capture. It was the first real evidence that prey attraction might succeed where brute hunting failed. But success came at a moral cost. The images of trembling live rabbits surrounded by constrictors provoked outrage from animal welfare groups and even from some scientists within the project. Public pressure increased step by step. The experiments were labeled barbaric by the critics, who contended that no species in the world, no matter how invasive, could ever be a reason for the sacrifice of innocent animals. Officials had no choice but to answer, and soon enough, the funding for live bait trials was completely withdrawn. However, it was the program's termination that made another significant discovery possible. The principle was established. It was the method, and not the means, that mattered. The next question was evident. Could they imitate the scent, heat, and very slight movement of a marsh rabbit without employing a living creature? Engineers, biologists, and conservation tech specialists started working together, fusing wildlife science with robotics. They examined every sensory trigger that lured a python: infrared heat signatures, thermal contrast against cool swamp air, and the almost undetectable musky smell of mammal fur. Every factor was treated as a data point for a mechanical copy. Thus, the rabbit blueprint was created. Scientists thought about a durable decoy that would be able to give off heat, release a synthetic scent, and imitate the twitchy movements of a real rabbit. This was not only about pythons attracting, but also their capturing. Every encounter could be photographed and recorded by the cameras and sensors, making it possible for the decoy to become a field researcher itself. The project passed through different stages, moving from concept to prototype very quietly, and even the controversy surrounding it did not alert anyone to what was going on. For the first time, technology made it possible to retaliate without slaying. However, it remained uncertain whether the snakes would be so gullible as not to notice the trick at all, or whether they would just smell the deception and the fur. That answer would come soon enough, as Florida unleashed its first army of robotic rabbits into the wild, and the Everglades held its breath to see what would happen next. Robo-rabbits in the wild. When Florida's first batch of robotic rabbits rolled into the Everglades, few believed the experiment would work. At sunrise, the prototypes looked almost comical. Small, soft-furred decoys surrounded by wires, sensors, and tiny solar panels glinting in the mist. But there were no toys. Each one represented years of frustration, innovation, and millions in funding. They were designed to fool a predator that had outsmarted every trap so far. Engineers called them robo-rabbits. Wildlife officers called them a last hope. Each decoy was a marvel of practical design, built from weather-resistant polymers, coated with synthetic fur, and layered with thermal pads. They emitted a heat signature nearly identical to that of a living marsh rabbit. Tiny centimeters released a chemical compound mimicking rabbit musk, drifting on the swamp breeze. Even the ears could twitch, powered by silent micromotors. To a python's heat-sensitive tongue, these machines were indistinguishable from the real thing. Hidden within was a camera linked to a motion-triggered transmitter. Whenever something slithered close, the system activated, sending an alert to biologists stationed miles away. Powering all this was sunlight. Each decoy carried a small solar panel connected to rechargeable batteries, allowing them to operate for weeks without maintenance. They were anchored inside protective pens, enclosures strong enough to survive curious raccoons, storms, and the occasional gator. The goal wasn't to slay the snakes directly, but to lure them into monitored zones where trained teams could move in for capture. When the first 120 units were deployed across key hotspots, no one expected immediate results. The swamp had crushed optimism before. The Everglades, however, reacted differently this time. Right from the beginning, the field cameras captured various scenes, which no one had seen from such a close position. Big pythons were coming up to the decoys very gradually, with their tongues flicking and bodies shining under the moonlight. A few of them hit the decoys right away, wrapping around the motionless rabbits as if they were living prey. Some others were a bit more cautious. They felt something strange and then disappeared into the darkness. Before long, the data started coming in. The robotic bunnies were not just bringing the snakes, they were actually tracing their movements. The activation of every camera was equivalent to adding more dots to an ever-increasing digital map of python hotspots. The researchers could now be sure of the areas where the breeding females were, which canals guided their movement, and the times when the snakes were most active. The decoys had turned into both bait and an intelligence network. Nonetheless, difficulties still appeared. The price of each one was approximately $4,000, and their survival in the swamp's extremely hot and humid conditions required a series of continuous tests. The miracle of engineering would be the location of funding that decides whether it can grow into a statewide system. But it was the psychological shift it caused that was priceless. For the first time in decades, the researchers felt they were on a fence. The Everglades has been quiet for years, but now that quietness holds a pulse of possibility, a hum of motors beneath the fur. If this deep dive helped, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us if tech should lead wildlife recovery or if it risks a new set of problems. And keep watching. The next video on your screen follows another audacious plan to save a broken ecosystem.